You probably won't believe me, but I need to tell someone before it happens again. It's been weeks since I left that place, and I still can't shake the chill that seeps into my bones whenever dusk approaches. Every shadow seems to deepen with a malevolent intent. Every muffled sound outside my window sends my heart hammering against my ribs. I thought I'd escaped it, but I'm beginning to suspect it wasn't the house that was haunted, but the knowledge itself. It started innocently enough, as these things always do. My company, a small tech firm, had secured a last-minute contract in a rural town called Oakhaven, nestled deep in the Vermont countryside. My usual hotel was fully booked for some local festival, leaving me scrambling for accommodation. That's how I stumbled upon Mrs. Albright's Airbnb listing, the Whispering Pines Cottage. It promised quaint charm, tranquility, and a surprisingly low price for a 3-night stay. The photos showed a cozy, antique-filled home, surrounded by a thick, dark forest, but it looked inviting enough. I arrived just as the late afternoon sun began to dip behind the impossibly tall pines. The cottage was even more charming in person, an old Victorian with a welcoming porch swing and a burst of vibrant petunias by the door. A wisp of wood smoke curled lazily from the chimney, filling the air with a comforting, earthy scent. Mrs. Albright, a woman who looked every bit like a kindly grandmother with her silver hair pulled into a neat bun and a perpetually warm smile, greeted me at the threshold. Her eyes, however, held a peculiar, almost knowing depth that belied her gentle demeanor. "Welcome, dear," she said, her voice soft like rustling leaves. Come in, you must be tired from your drive." She led me through a hallway that smelled faintly of lavender and old books, into a surprisingly spacious bedroom. It was furnished with a 4-poster bed draped in a thick floral quilt, a heavy mahogany dresser, and a tall, narrow window covered by a pair of extraordinarily thick, dark velvet curtains. I noticed immediately how dark they made the room, even with the faint sunlight filtering in from the rest of the house. As she showed me the small, ensuite bathroom, Mrs. Albright's voice dropped, becoming a low, almost conspiratorial whisper. "Now, dear, just one little rule for your stay here." She paused, her gaze drifting to the window. "Those curtains," she said, her voice firm, losing its previous softness. "They must stay closed after dark. Never open them, not even a sliver." I chuckled, thinking it was an old lady's eccentricity, perhaps an odd fear of drafts or a desire for privacy from the few scattered neighbors. "Oh, of course, Mrs. Albright, no problem at all." Her smile returned, but her eyes remained fixed on the velvet. "Good, just remember what I said. It's important." That first night, I was too exhausted to give it much thought. I pulled the heavy curtains tighter, convinced it was just a strange quirk of a charming old woman. The room became an impenetrable cocoon of darkness. I slept soundly, surprisingly so, given the unusual bed and unfamiliar surroundings. My dreams were untroubled. The next day passed in a blur of spreadsheets and meetings in Oakhaven. I grabbed a quick bite at the local diner, a place called the Rusty Spoon, where the waitress, a cheerful woman named Brenda, told me stories about the town's history, but nothing about Mrs. Albright or her particular rules. The air that day felt crisp, clean, full of the scent of pine and damp earth. I felt a pleasant sense of detachment from my regular city life. When I returned to the cottage that evening, the sun was already setting, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple. The air was noticeably cooler. A shiver, not from the cold, traced its way down my spine as I stepped inside. The house felt different, quieter, with a subtle shift in atmosphere. Mrs. Albright was nowhere to be seen, likely tucked away in her own quarters. I went to my room, the darkness of the heavy curtains immediately noticeable. I switched on the bedside lamp, casting a warm, golden glow across the room. I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling unusually restless. That peculiar rule nagged at me. Never open them, not even a sliver. Why such vehemence? What could possibly be out there in the dark, serene countryside that warranted such a strict injunction? No streetlights, no other houses visible from the window, just the impenetrable wall of the forest. Curiosity, a dangerous thing at the best of times, began to claw its way to the surface. It wasn't a dramatic urge, more like a persistent itch I couldn't quite scratch. I rationalized it. Maybe she had a garden she didn't want disturbed by light, or perhaps she was just a bit eccentric and wanted me to feel cozy. There couldn't be anything truly there. It was just a window. What harm could a quick peek do? I stood, my heart giving a small, anticipatory flutter. The heavy velvet felt impossibly thick, almost coarse, beneath my fingers. It seemed to resist, to hold on to its secret. I hesitated, a faint whisper of unease brushing against my mind. This was ridiculous. I was an adult, not a child afraid of the dark. With a sigh, I gripped the edge of the curtain and slowly, deliberately, pulled it back just a fraction of an inch. At first, I saw nothing but the profound, inky blackness of a moonless countryside night. The tree line was a darker silhouette against the faint glow of distant stars. I leaned closer, trying to discern shapes, the details of the formidable forest, and then I saw them. They weren't in the forest. They were pressed against the very glass of the window, their faces flattened, distorted by the pressure. Dozens of them, pale, almost translucent, as if carved from milk-white stone. Their eyes were wide, unblinking dark pits that seemed to absorb what little light escaped from my room. They had no discernible features beyond the vague outline of a nose and mouth, just these terribly smooth, blank countenances. And they were all directed at me. They weren't screaming, weren't growling, they weren't doing anything at all. They were just there, waiting. Their faces were an inch from the glass, so close I could almost feel the coldness of their skin through the pane. It wasn't just one or two, it was a wall of them, stretching as far as my narrow sliver of vision allowed. They pressed in, cheek to cheek, forehead to forehead, a macabre mosaic of the unliving. And that's when I understood what Mrs. Albright had meant by acknowledgement. Their stillness, their silent, unwavering gaze, it wasn't just observation, it was a terrifying invitation. They wanted me to see them, they wanted me to react, to recognize them. My mind went completely blank with terror. Every muscle in my body locked up. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. My hand, still gripping the curtain, trembled violently. I felt like a deer caught in headlights, utterly paralyzed. The sheer number of them, their silent, expectant vigil, was a horror far beyond anything I could have imagined. They weren't just looking. They were drinking me in. With a ragged gasp that tore from my throat, I slammed the curtain shut, plunging the room back into total darkness, the heavy velvet swishing with a morbid finality. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, so loud I could hear it echoing in my ears. I stumbled backward, tripping over something unseen, and fell onto the bed, scrambling to pull the quilt up to my chin as if it could somehow protect me. I lay there, shivering, for what felt like hours. Every faint creak of the old house, every rustle of the wind outside, sounded like their pale fingers scraping against the glass, their silent faces pressing closer. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, a waking nightmare, but the memory was too vivid, too terrifyingly real. I knew what I had seen. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I sat bolt upright, staring at the darkened rectangle of the window, convinced they were still out there, their unblinking eyes fixed on the heavy velvet, knowing I was just on the other side. The next morning I packed my bag in a frantic blur. Mrs. Albright was in the kitchen, humming a cheerful tune, preparing breakfast. Her smile was as warm as ever, but when her eyes met mine, the faint, knowing depth I'd seen before seemed to deepen, filled with a profound sadness, almost pity. She didn't ask if I'd slept well. She just said, "Leaving so soon, dear? Such a shame." Her gaze lingered on me, and for a moment, I felt like she wasn't seeing me, but something that now clung to me. I mumbled something about an urgent call back at the office, paid her, and practically ran to my car. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The Whispering Pines cottage looked as charming and innocent as it had when I arrived, but I could still feel the weight of those unseen eyes. I'm back in my apartment now, miles away, but it hasn't stopped. I keep the curtains drawn, even during the day, a compulsion I can't fight. The air in my apartment feels thin, cold, like the space directly behind glass. Sometimes, late at night, when the city outside quiets down, I hear it, a faint, almost imperceptible tapping, just once, twice, against my bedroom window. And every time I turn swiftly, my heart leaping into my throat, I see nothing. But then, reflected in the dark glass, just for a split second, before my brain can process it, I see a flicker of something pale. Something that wasn't there before. And I know they're still waiting, they're still watching. And they know. Cottage.